We have the luxury of living in a world where pure imagination can be turned from thought into reality, like, weirdly easily. Modern technology has helped to make so many discoveries, reach so many heights, and just tell so many stories that it's kind of insane what we're capable of right now. And this especially goes for the industries like film and media, which kind of put anything you want onto a screen and can adapt pretty much any story you can think of, nonfiction and fiction. Some of the stories you might not even think are adapted from books, like Forrest Gump, Clockwork Orange, Apollo 13, Harry Potter. Well, Harry Potter's obvious. And then, of course, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, while so many stories have just reached a great amount of heights in cinema, it's very unfortunate that a lot of great stories have fallen flat in their first one or two shots. Stories like Ender's Game, Divergence, the Percy Jackson series, or what I'm going to talk about today, the I'm Number 4 series, had one or two shots at the big screen, but due to things like studio interference, fan base backlash, or some other third thing, these stories just ended up turning into something that was either so decent that nobody remembers it, or so bad that nobody cares enough to look back on it. And this is unfortunate because I feel a lot of stories deserve way more than what they were given, explicitly because they have a great book series and they have great stories to tell, but they were just told wrong or not as well as they could have been. So what I'm here today is to give those stories just a little bit of recognition. There's a huge fan base out there that wants to see what they could look like on the big screen, and I'm here to talk about how they could possibly go onto the big screen in a great way, in a new segment on my channel that I'd like to call Will It Movie. So recently I decided to go back and read the I Am Number 4 series. This is considered the Lorien Legacies because it is a total of 7 main books, 15 side books, and a new spin-off series, which I'll get to later. Honestly, I feel like there's a lot more here than just a moody teenage drama that was produced by Michael Bay. Not to say Michael Bay is a bad director or a bad producer, I'll just give the backstory. So not long after this book was released, Michael Bay introduced it to DreamWorks, of whom had seen the successes done by Twilight and Harry Potter, and decided, hey, we want some money from fans. So Steven Spielberg was actually handed a story that Michael Bay had written as a screen adaptation for I Am Number 4, and decided to use it to compete with Twilight. Anyways, so Smallville creators Al Gough and Miles Miller were hired on to screenwrite, and the director was switched from initially being Michael Bay to DJ Caruso. Caruso is known for directing the Smallville television series as well as Eagle Eye and a movie called Disturbia. And unfortunately for Caruso, he was given exactly 1 year to write, direct, understand, edit, and shoot this entire film, not in that order, in order to compete on a Memorial Day release in 2011. Now, what I don't want to point fingers and point blame at anyone for this movie was completely made to grab the heart of bookworms and kind of just have them pay money for something they don't want to see. Now, again, I don't like saying that because the movie does have a few enjoyable moments, but they're kind of just hidden by corporate greed. You know, the classic action movie shots or the classic explosions you see from Michael Bay. It's kind of all over this movie. I purely want to say this though because of what reviews have said, going as far as considering it, quote, positioning itself as the start of a franchise. I Am Number 4's familiar plot and unconvincing performance add up to a noisy, derivative, and ultimately forgettable sci-fi thriller. The movie scored 3 out of 10s across the board. Wow. While this movie did gross $149,878,437 at the worldwide box office, tripling its budget, it just simply was not enough for DreamWorks to work on a movie adaptation to the book's sequel, The Power of Six. Around 2011 and 2013, the screenwriters were asked about a sequel to the film. They were hopeful that the series would continue, but did not seem confident that it would. Now, a lot of factors can go into this, of course, reviews, because, 3 out of 10s across the board, that's not exactly a good thing, but also just the sheer fact that the characters were supposed to remain teenagers, and a lot of the actors at this point were pretty adult looking for teenagers. And now that those actors are going into their 30s and it has been 6, maybe 7 years since this movie has actually been discussed by anyone at DreamWorks or just any other company, I think it's safe to say that the book series adaptation that we saw in 2011 has died. It's pretty safe to say. So Why then do I think this series deserves another try? I mean, is the story that good? I don't know about that good. It's my personal opinion that it's that good. After looking at this series again, I realized how much is here. After looking on online fan bases, I realized how many people actually love this series still to this day. And while the adaptation did not do the stories justice, I personally believe that this book series and its fan base deserves a lot more respect than they get. So specifically, I'm going to be looking at the I Am Number 4 series' main books, which is I Am Number 4 all the way to United as One. I'm not going to be taking a look at the Lorien Legacies book, which I believe has 15 stories in it. It basically goes into more detail about the characters in each of these stories, but that's not what we're here for today. Of course, in order to talk about this, I kind of have to spoil stuff for a 10-year-old book series, so here's an extensive crash course with a spoiler warning up here. So what exactly are the Lorien Legacies about? I'm going to try and be as brief about this as I can because there's a lot to go over here. About 10 years prior to the first book, which let's say if there is an adaptation here, and this year is 2021, this is around 2011, which is when the original movie came out. Glad I just reminded myself of that. The planet of Lorien was attacked and destroyed by the people of the planet Mogador. These people are called Mogadorians, or Mogs for short. I'm pretty sure I'm butchering that name, but if I am, comment down below. I want to know that I'm being an idiot. And as a result of this destruction, 18 Lorien people had managed to escape, excluding the pilot that took them over to Earth, of which included 9 Garde and 9 Sapon. Also pretty sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly. Garde are the people of Lorien who gain powers and abilities known as legacies from their planet, such as flight, invisibility, breathing underwater, and they all share telekinesis and heightened strength and speed. But most legacies kind of just vary in between individuals. These people are considered the soldiers and protectors of the planet, while the Sapon of Lorien are the ones without any abilities, but are rather intelligent beings that hold the history of Lorien and teach the young Garde how to be the best that they can. At a young age, Garde are actually assigned these Sapons and raised by them and their grandparents. So unfortunately, when they leave the planet, it's just the 9 Garde, the 9 Sapon, and the pilot. The plan here was, with the destruction of Lorien, to have each of the Garde children eventually grow up and become the new elders of Lorien when they return to the planet Lorien. Originally, this was a group of 10, but with only 9 Garde children surviving, it's just going to be 9. With the most powerful of those children, or the wisest leader, becoming what is considered Pittacus Lore, or the highest elder. Which, yes, that is the name of the author on the front cover of these books. However, that name is coined from authors James Frey and Jobie Hughes. Once the Guardian Sapons get to Earth, they're each given a charm, which allows them to basically survive and not be killed unless they are outside of a specific numbered order. And each child cannot be killed outside of said number. So number 1 has to be killed before number 2 has to be killed before number 3, and so on. If the Mogadorians were to find the Lorien Garde children and kill them out of order, any damage done onto that child would be done onto the Mogadorian instead. However, the charm also conveniently works where if any of the Garde children were to come into contact with one another again, at least in a certain radius of one another, not necessarily just, high-fiving or something, then the charm would ultimately be broken and the Mogadorians could kill any of the Lorien children outside of whatever number they were given. Each Garde member is also given a magical chest, which basically holds all of their mystical Lorien items into one small box that can only be opened by both them and their Sapon, unless their Sapon dies, in which the box can just be opened by only them, and if they die, then the box can be opened by itself. I promise this book series is good and not as complicated as I'm making it to sound. When the Lorien people get to Earth, they are greeted by a few Earthlings that help them scatter across the planet, give them a set of jewels to sell and have money to hold on to off of, and ultimately just try to survive and hope that the Mogadorians don't come after them. The first book follows John Smith, basically our number 4, who just found out that the first 3 were murdered, and that he's next. I'm not going to go through exactly everything that goes on in the book series because we'd be here all day based on the fact that there's like thousands of pages sitting in front of me. However, as a quick recap, we find more numbers as the story goes on and also find different points of social media coming up, different points of character development, reasoning behind betrayals and other such things. I'm going to get into that a little bit, but I'm not going to dive into the entire story just because it would take a while. Throughout this entire series, we have numbers 4 through 9 still alive, as well as a character by the name of Ella who came to Earth on a separate ship, holding a bunch of chimera on it and basically bringing a lot more Lorien life than we thought to Earth. First character I want to talk about here is Cetricus Ra. Cetricus is revealed to be the leader of the Mogadorians, although he is from Lorien descent. Cetricus Ra is technically the last living elder of Lorien. He worked alongside one of the original Pittacus lords who lived for thousands of years. However, he was outcast from the planet of Lorien because he was trying to forcefully enhance the powers of the Garde further beyond what they could do, and unnaturally and sickeningly to some degree. As a result, he went to the opposing planet of Mogador, enhancing their abilities, strength, anything you can think of, and having them attack Lorien as a form of revenge. And the reason he does this is because he wants to advance his research and his power to pretty much do anything he wants ever. Kind of a weird villain trope, but definitely an interesting one, and I promise he's more interesting than just the comic book villain I'm making him sound out to be. He has a lot of developments when it comes to putting trust in people, going completely psychotic, having family relationships with the character Ella I just mentioned, and overall having this menacing power over top of pretty much any character in the story. And over the last 1,000 or so years, he's also enhanced himself, become the most powerful Lorien Garde that ever lived. Pittacus lore was supposed to execute him actually before he left Lorien, so now he's left with this purple scar as a reminder that he has failed as a Lorien being. However, because Pittacus lore valued him too much as a friend, this resulted in Cetricus still being alive. As an enhanced Mogadorian Lorien hybrid at this point, his legacy abilities include telekinesis, mentis, which is a form of mental communication, Aturnus, which allows him to be any age physically that he has been, Futurum, which is an ability that allows you to see any future outcome of any situation, Magnum, which is metallic manipulation, Fortum and Excellix that allow him to be stronger and faster than any living Garde, Plenum, which is wound healing to a degree and resurrection to a degree, and Drainin, which allows him to drain the powers of any other Garde within reach. Now I'll go briefly over numbers 1, 2, and 3. Number 1 was a young girl living in Malaysia who was found and killed at the age of 14. Due to being a rebellious teenager, a picture of her was taken at a police station, tipping off the Mogadorians to her location very easily. She becomes a semi-important character around books 4 and 5, which are the Fall of 5 and the Revenge of 7, explicitly because of a character by the name of Adam, or Adamus. Adam is one of the fallen children of the Mogadorian general and was enhanced by the technology creations of Cetricus Ra. He inherited the memories of one as well as her Terek legacy, which is basically earthquakes, and overall has a change of heart when it comes to the outlook of the fight and joins the Loriens in their quest to defeat the Mogadorians. Number 2, who went by the name of Maggie Hoyle, was a 12-year-old girl who hid in London out of fear due to her Sapon dying. And because she was so fearful, kind of living by herself without her Sapon at a very young age, she actually tweeted out, 9, now 8, are the rest of you out there, to make sure that the others were still alive, and was immediately found and killed, because you can find the location of people that tweet, I guess, and she didn't get out of the location quick enough. 6 actually responded to this tweet by saying, "We are here," which resulted in her getting kidnapped as well as her Sapon, Katarina, getting kidnapped as well. Katarina also ended up dying after getting kidnapped, which was very unfortunate, and wow, a lot of these kids deal with death at like the age of 12. Number 2's powers are fairly unknown other than strength, speed, and telekinesis, because that's pretty much what every other Garde gets. Number 3 is a character we briefly see at the beginning of the I Am Number 4 story. His name is Hanu, and he's the youngest of the 9 Lorien Garde who escaped, excluding Ella, because she technically doesn't count in the number situation. In the first book, I Am Number 4, Hanu and his Sapon are hunted down and killed in Kenya by one of the Mogadorian generals, and Hanu's powers are unknown other than strength, speed, and telekinesis, which was displayed in the first book. The I Am Number 4 series, or the Lorien Legacies if you prefer to call that, follows the main number 4, or John Smith. John Smith is a 16-year-old leader of the remaining Garde. John is a fairly overpowered character throughout this book series, but what's great about this book series is that he learns to be a leader before he gains all this overpoweredness. By the end of the story, he grew into these powers and became a leader, making for his ability of Zimmick to feel well-deserved as a character. John's ability of Zimmick basically allows him to have the ability any other Guardian member could have as long as he can think about it or has seen it before. And while this does sound very overpowered, he learns to become a leader way before having learned that he has Zimmick. It's revealed in book 3 that he has a healing ability which was never there before, after having seen 7 use hers. However, it's not actually revealed that it is Simic or a copy ability at all until a later book where he's able to copy the abilities of a new Garde member. And by that point in the book series, he's already proven himself a leader, he's already proven himself to be one of the best, he's already proven himself to be level-headed in any situation, so it's a great amount of character growth. And since Simic allows him to basically have any ability under the sun, I won't get too into his powers and abilities because we're just going to be here all day. On to number 5, who doesn't truly have an alias in the main stories, but he is considered the most controversial character in the stories. He's the second oldest of the Garde and an anti-hero of this story. While he's intelligent, he's a lost child of the Garde, constantly confused as he's played a part in both sides of the Mogadorians and the Garde in this war. He's described as a husky character and a bit of a sadist by his peers, but truly, what misunderstood character isn't actually a sadist? His powers include the classic enhancement of strength and speed, telekinesis, Avex, which is flight, and Externa, which is power absorption. The final legacy of power absorption actually adds to his whole insanity bit, as there's a point where he loses his eye in the end of book 4, The Fall of 5, mid-battle, and actually uses that empty eye socket to place a rubber ball and a metal ball. The power absorption legacy basically allows him to touch something and become materialized in that material. If he were to touch the rubber ball, he would be turned into rubber purely. If he were to touch the metal ball, he would be turned into metal. If he were to touch fire, he would be turned into fire. He's kind of insane. Fun fact, Periander, which is the counterpart in the Elders of Lorien to number 5, is a Greek word that actually means tyrant. Now on to number 6, who went by the name of Marren Elizabeth while she was living a normal life. She's the edgier female of the team, with a lot of trust issues, having lost her to Spawn at a very young age, not unlike 5. She has somewhat of a bloodlust attitude when it comes to killing Mogadorians, but makes up for it by learning to be open with characters like John and Sam throughout her journey on this team. Her legacies include, as I said before, the classic strength, speed, telekinesis, as well as novice, which is invisibility, and Sturmo, which is weather manipulation. Number 7, a character who goes by the name of Marina throughout the stories, is the most hopeful and eldest of the Garde that are still alive. She's a character who doesn't really like to fight. She's actually the healer of the group throughout most of it until 8's death in book 4, which basically stirs a lot of emotion in her that she has to learn to calm down with. She only truly acts on her feelings when it comes to fighting against 5, who is the murderer of 8, and unlike 6 or 9, she's not the most eager to go into battle and kill Mogadorians. Her story arc actually follows somewhat of a U-shape in which she truly learns to control her emotions. From the beginning, she's a strong-headed person, but she has to learn how to not only deal with emotions, but bring it back to who she used to be. She truly learns what it means to grieve in her darkest moments before returning to an attitude of pacifism and lightheartedness by the end of the war. Her abilities include telekinesis, submarine glacin, which allow her to manipulate ice and water as well as breathe underwater, Noxin, which is night vision, and Recupero, which is healing. Number 8 was initially considered to be the most powerful of the Guardian members and possibly Pittacus lore. He actually had a cult following when he was living in India, believing him to be the Hinduism god Vishnu, or at least the reincarnation of him. And then he died, and everyone had that oh no moment because our Pittacus lore is dead. While 8 was extremely powerful, his attitude towards life was always fun-loving and kind-hearted, which partially resulted in his death since he was protecting 9 when acting this way. 8's existence in these stories is somewhat tricky to explain. He has the Superman ideal, which results in him having good intentions. He helps 7 feel normal and brings that shock factor into play, with his death of course. And his legacies include telekinesis, teleportation, morphin, which is shape-shifting, and a really confusing one called Pondus. I say confusing because this allows him to change the molecular structure of anything around him. He uses this to walk on water and phase through walls, as well as make his skin impenetrable, even though 5 stabbed him. But I guess he was distracted at that point of the story, so it's not too confusing, but anyways. Finally, we have the character number 9, aka Stanley Worthington, when he was living as a civilian. 9 is considered the strongest and most well-trained of the living Garde, considering that he was constantly trained by his Sapan every day, every hour. His character is cocky, arrogant, and probably sees the most growth throughout these stories, seeing that he becomes more mature throughout each book and begins to take the world more seriously as they go into the final fight in United as One. His legacies include the classic strength, speed, telekinesis, as well as legacies such as gravity manipulation, Anima, which is the ability to communicate with animals, Mirus, which allows him to transfer any legacy to another Garde, Fortum and Nemus, which let him be physically stronger than any other Garde member, and a form of superhearing. Now Ella, who is technically the 10th member of the living Garde children, she is the final Lorien-born Garde and is the granddaughter of the villain Cetricus Ra. Gasp. She's also the youngest of the group by chronological age, although she's able to change her age, so next to 5, she has the most frequent interactions with the Mogadorians, as Cetricus pushes her to be a part of the family legacy, brainwashing her to be enhanced and by his side at all times. Her story is seen as another confused upbringing, being that her grandfather is the ultimate villain of these stories, except unlike 5, she is actually a blood villain rather than just a tormented one. Ella's legacies include telekinesis, Eternus, which is the ability to change her physical age, but only ones that she has lived through, unlike Cetricus Ra, who's lived through so many ages that he can be as old or young as he wants. Mentis, which is telepathic communication with the Garde. Drainin, which I mentioned earlier, is the ability Cetricus Ra holds in draining the use of legacies by other Garde. And Futurum, another legacy Cetricus Ra holds in which she can see into the future just like him. Alongside the Garde, we also have some human characters that help throughout these stories, including Sarah Hart, who is John Smith's frequent girlfriend throughout the entire series. We also have Sam Good, who plays a major role in learning what it means to fight for what you love rather than just letting the world turn in these stories, holding an importance in growth as he reaches adulthood. As well as this, we also have Sam's father Malcolm helping out in these stories, as he is one of the humans who helped the Garde come to Earth. He also does a frequent amount of research through these stories, so while he's not a physical ally, he is definitely a historical ally. Now, while Sarah's character is technically a damsel in distress for a good portion of these stories, or considered to be a traitor when Cetricus Ra shapeshifts into her, she is powerful enough to hold her own and has actually fought alongside the other Garde at certain points in the story. She's also good to keep around in the group because she knows how to keep the group level-headed when necessary, especially John, because, she's the love interest. Towards the end of the series, with how many Loric elements are actually being combined with the Earth, we see that Earth becomes a new form of Lorien, and a lot of children throughout the Earth become Loric Garde, which becomes very confusing to some degree, but it does add a lot of other great characters towards the end of the series, but they're not as important until the spin-off series, which would come later in the form of Generation 1 in the Lorien Legacies Reborn. So, now that you know a little bit more about the Lorien Legacies, how exactly would this fit into the big screen? Like a lot of other book adaptations, this story's creativity when it comes to names and historical legacies is one that's pretty unique. The lore of Lorien, and no pun intended, is inspired by many ways by the peaceful lives and destructive actions of Egyptian mythology with Greek mythology. Name drops like Cetricus Ra, as well as his world-destroying ship, the Anubis, kind of give hint that, hey, this is Egyptian mythology based. And it also kind of gives hints of how power and order of the villains in the story display and can make for some very odd Egyptian and space mixing. I would love to see the ships designed in more pyramidal shapes, as well as the uniforms become this red, black, and gold that are not only colorful and, eccentric when it comes to the viewer's point of view, but also display a nod to the Egyptian god of the underworld, Anubis. We could also have Cetricus Ra stand out because of his purple glowing scar, as well as a more gold-based uniform since his name has Ra in it, like Ra the sun god. On the opposite side of things, we could see a mythological rivalry to some degree. Terms like Chimera bring part of Greek mythology that could show a clash of long-lost religion and play into some really interesting costume and set designs. It's revealed part of the way through the series that Nine has an apartment that his Sapon bought, which basically has any kind of food, living conditions they would need, as well as a lot of training areas that they take advantage of in the 4th book when they still live there. This penthouse could be inspired a little bit by Olympus based on the way it is treated throughout this book series. A lot of the design could come from Greek columns, and we could have colors like blue and orange to combat this darker black and gold of the Mogadorians. The idea of Greek mythology can also be seen in the name of the elders Pittacus, Cleobis, Solon, Kylon, Bias, Thales, and Periander, which I mentioned earlier does mean the term tyrant in Greek. This idea of a mythological clash in heroes and villains can also be seen in 8 being considered the reincarnation of the god Vishnu with his blue skin and possibly orange robes. The only problem with this is that it might be somewhat risky to have Hindu faith compared to that of old god tales in Egyptian and Greek mythology, since Hinduism is still practiced today. This might accidentally hint at the ideas that Hindu gods are nothing more than, mythological legends, so that's going to have to be approached very carefully.
Outside of visual design in the story, there are a lot of story-based characters to relate to as well as follow. Each of the numbered Loriens and their Sapans, even human characters, have their own story in relation to the planet Lorien, as well as a satisfying conclusion for most of them. While they're all outcasts in some way, they form a sort of Franken family and learn social skills more or less because of each other. After spending over a decade alone on a foreign planet, in a time where we are still learning to accept one another as a culture, this can be a fantastic way for both kids and young adults to kind of learn acceptance throughout this entire series. I also want to add, I do think it would be fun if the director also went by the pseudonym of Pittacus Lore, just to continue with the aspect that was given in this book series. However, obviously there are going to be a lot of problems in creating this into a film series or even as a Netflix adaptation, specifically because, well, starting with the idea that alien superheroes, it's been done like way too many times, just in DC Comics specifically. Now, while I personally never wanted to put these books down when I was reading through them, I understand how complicated it would be to bring these to the big screen. I do believe many people will be open to this story and think of it as an original piece. However, just picture this in your head for a second. Kids coming to Earth after their home planet is destroyed to fight off rivaling aliens and looking like a human, still holding on to a few items their parents left for them to fight in a world they don't understand. That's kind of just Superman. You know, the man who was sent to Earth after his home planet was destroyed with maybe a few items in a world he doesn't understand, but learning to live in it. As well as the idea of Lorelite and Kryptonite. It's just one is enhancing the powers of the alien, the other one is kind of just making them really weak. But this is not something that hasn't been ripped off or, you know, inspired from before. We have characters like Brightburn or Homelander that are two very clear examples of taking the idea of Superman and bringing him to a darker aspect. This, I believe, is more of an idea of taking the idea of Superman and breaking him down into multiple character ideas in one series. However, I do understand with the aspect of analyzing this as more than just a superhero-inspired story from the idea of Superman. There's obviously going to be that comparison, which is definitely a downfall to bringing this to the silver screen. Another downside or difficulty, as I mentioned, is the idea of bringing Vishnu to the big screen because Hinduism is still practiced today, and that would have to be done very carefully so as no one would get offended or hurt in any way, shape, or form. Each book takes place very close to each other. While the events of I Am Number 4 and the Power of 6 take place months apart, I mean, Fate of 10 and Unite as One take place within minutes of each other, so that's going to be very difficult to, you know, have a long production process through. I would personally suggest that this becomes a series of some kind with different seasons being filmed back to back, and maybe some of the final books being combined into one season or filmed back to back, specifically because, as I stated before, Fate of 10 and United as One take place within minutes of each other. That's going to be very difficult to film age-wise for a bunch of teenagers throughout 7 books. Alongside this, when I say combine some of the books, I also mean that some of the books are a bit long. For example, when I was reading The Fall of 5, I felt as though the story was kind of dragging on a little bit. The entire story is practically based in 9's apartment after picking up 5. And we learn more about the characters, yes, and it becomes a character study. But if that becomes an entire season, that's going to be a little bit difficult to keep people's attention. So I understand this next part is going to be just a little bit nitpicky, but throughout the first few books, we do get a look into John Smith or 4's relationship with 6, of which kind of blossoms but ultimately dies out by book 4. I just personally felt like this relationship could have been done better, and it actually can be done better on the silver screen if we hold on to it a little bit longer and let it fizzle out rather than ultimately just dropping it out of nowhere. John Smith does have a giant relationship with Sarah Hard and ultimately becomes very attached to her throughout the series, and 6 does have a relationship with Sam Good as well. However, this was kind of just a relationship that was dropped onto us and made us feel a bit confused as viewers, and then dropped not too long afterwards. Again, this is just a nitpicking thing, but I think it's something that could be done better on the silver screen if given the proper time management. Alongside this, the idea of following John Smith and kind of spreading out to other characters is great, but it is also something that has to be done correctly. This is a form of world building where if we introduce one character and open it up to multiple other narrations, this can be done in a way that brings a lot more relatability to the table. However, if we focus too much on John Smith, then yes, we do get that one character aspect, but we lose track of literally anybody else along the way and any great storytelling that could be done. But if we focus too much on those other characters, then we lose track on the purpose of John Smith and the reasoning why he becomes such a great leader, and ultimately the purposeful main character of the story. But despite all those faults, as I mentioned, this series still deserves another chance at the big screen because of its potential. So to sum things up, I do think this series would work best as a streaming series adaptation, specifically because combining all these books into singular films might be something difficult to do and ultimately result in us losing track of bigger points in each of these stories. What do you guys think? Do you think this deserves another shot, or do you think it should just die with the 2011 film? I also want to bring up that I have been looking into the Lorien Legacies Reborn series, starting with Generation 1. It's a great series, and like this one, if you ever want to check it out, it's got some great storytelling and some new characters to bring to the table. Anyways, guys, that's all from me. Comment down below what you think that I should be looking at next. I would love a chance to look at the Percy Jackson series and ultimately try to analyze what that could be as a Netflix series or as a movie series again if it was ever given a chance. Anyways, that's all from me. See you guys next time.